where is this algorithm that's making decisions about what we should watch and shouldn't watch, right? And who's behind the algorithm, and what happens when the algorithm's wrong, right? Netflix stock's pretty down, so I don't know if the algorithm is something I'd bank on, honestly, right? So, I don't want to live in a world controlled by an algorithm. I want to live in a world where we use algorithms to improve our lives. We should be talking about the business side of this as well, right? I think we're at a very dangerous place in the film industry whereby you have black boxes that don't allow for independent producers to actually know how their films perform. I think if we're talking about data and investigative journalism, let's talk about data in the film industry. Let's talk about the fact that what's happening right now is denying filmmakers to have the capacity to monetize their library and to know what their valuation is, right? So you can't have a hit on a place like Netflix, which we've released Netflix films and we're thankful for the millions of people who watch them. But I can't go then and say, my last film did X in the box office. I don't have a metric to evaluate my own film. So how can I sustain myself? What that leaves you in is you're at the mercy of the view of the commissioning editor. Whatever they think of you is that's your valuation. You don't have a metric to go to the bank. So we are in a very dangerous place as we've seen technology become the superseding infrastructure that has engulfed the film and content business, as we all like to call this content thing, whatever that means. And we need to push back and make sure that independent producers are able to have their data, because if we don't, then a lot of these stories are going to be flukes, right? Right now, it's great that we're up here in Cannes talking about these films, but we're making these important whatever films by people like Geralyn and others underwriting the cost of these things because networks can't take risks on these things. Everyone likes to show up at the party and celebrate. Everyone likes to be at the premiere. But who wants to be there from the beginning? And you can't have the audacity to take that risk if you don't have independent financing. Now, how do I get independent financing if I can't point to a metric of sales and success, right? And that's why I think places like Cannes should be talking about. Yes, it's very important to fight for theatrical, and the French government doing that's important. Great. But if we are talking about the battle for the hearts and minds, we need independent producers to be able to monetize.
Well, you really touched on a point that actually Think Film is fighting for in Europe every day. We've managed to get Arte to include impACT in their budget lines so that you don't have to take money not from independent sources. And people like Geralyn who've been doing it in the States for so long, I mean, we need to just mainstream that. So I think the fight is there. We just need more people to join our mafia, I guess.
It's because they keep saying, well, the algorithm said this, the algorithm said that. I want to meet the algorithm. Where is this algorithm that's making decisions about what we should watch and shouldn't watch, right? And who's behind the algorithm, and what happens when the algorithm's wrong, right? Netflix stock's pretty down, so I don't know if the algorithm is something I'd bank on, honestly, right? So, I don't want to live in a world controlled by an algorithm. I want to live in a world where we use algorithms to improve our lives, right? And I think we have to, as storytellers, push back on that. And I think we have to really think about what else has to happen in the world for us to wake up. Like, the open society is beyond at risk. It is on fire, right? The entire cradle of the so-called free world is burning at the stake, and we're still having this conversation about what we should and shouldn't do, and whether these stories are safe, or whether something's too political, or whether something this or that. I'm really just sick and tired of it. Sorry.
I'm sick and tired, but I think this is a question we can actually transpose to the other panelists here as well. As much as we can use data to put out really powerful stories and we need the industry to completely disrupt its perspective, there's also manipulation, and creatives are at the heart of being able to manipulate content, bring disinformation. There is also an ethical thing to consider there. When you look at the work that you're doing with Navalny and trying to get that out to the world, I suppose you were afraid and concerned that perhaps some of the content might be manipulated or misused or then completely transposed by someone else. Is there support in the film industry to prevent those sort of things from happening? What do you think, Geralyn?
Well, I think that there's a lot of movies that are being made about disinformation and fake news and how to detect it and how to combat it and how to recognize it. And I think that people like Bellingcat are trying to put together, aggregate artificial AI. Ironically, it might take technology to self-correct technology, and who knows whether you can trust that ultimately. But the biggest problem facing the world right now, and especially in the Ukraine, is the ability to authenticate and verify data and visual data, and whether it's been manipulated, so it will be inadmissible in a war crime court. So the content is there, the amount of people capturing what's happening in the moment there's a lag between that and the ability to prove that it was actually made by the people that it said it was made by on the day that it was done, and that it's real. So that's a big problem that I know. I'm sure, Maria, you're up against that all the time with people, the Russians putting out things that are manipulated and not true, and then how do you combat that?
Well, my own sense of this, and I really echo Karim from the previous panel about this, I found what he said deeply important about this word content, which I also find a rather toxic word in its generic, rather meaningless aura. Because what are we really talking about is that in a data-driven universe, and particularly a data-undermined universe where so much data is being marshaled in such pernicious ways, following story, and I've never found myself as the person on a panel advocating storytelling, because I've always been thought of myself as kind of a political activist. But the truth is, what's really strong about how you change a conversation is not when you can marshal a whole bunch of manipulable statistics, but rather when you follow somebody through a kind of a strategic empathy, an empathy where you've felt something for them, and you've marshaled that for an audience so that the Odyssey leaves you with a feeling, or the Bronte sisters leave you with a new and interesting feeling that changes almost by medium being the message. It sets a new standard. It says a message before you get into any of the data in the weeds. And so for me, I guess our hunt has been for the contradictory story paths that bring everybody on board. Because if they don't agree with your filter bias, if you've sort of allowed your own biases to be obliterated, then the audience feels the authenticity of that search. And then they can identify with it, because now we see information coming and we assume it's all loaded. When something goes, I had a very silly little moment in my Elvis film where somebody criticized me on camera, told me they didn't think I knew what I was doing with my film. And I put it in the film because it was a cool conversation. And everyone said, my God, that's when I bought the rest of the movie, was when you showed your own weakness. And of course that does make sense. We all need that, because that's empathy that we've brought to bear to understand how other people may feel differently and meet them halfway. So I guess my message would be the Rumi quote. There's this wonderful quote from Rumi where he said, out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. For me, that's storytelling.
Philippa, are you joining the field?
Yes, definitely. I'm game for the field. Looking for more players on that field. If I think of Storyville, I'd like everyone to know that it's open to as many. It's diversified in every possible way to get the stories out to as many people.
It's not just patriarchal white guys like me anymore?
Sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah. But you did have your days.
I had my moment. It's over. Let's go move on.
Yes. And yes, from all over the world. And to remind everyone that there is great value for public television, and public television will be on streamers everywhere. Now in the UK, it's on the iPlayer, but everywhere in the world, everywhere in Europe, it's going to get stronger and stronger. So it will be, and it is accessible, and it's ours as a people, as an audience.
Carole, what field are you playing?
So, I was thinking about it. I think a lot of broadcasters and platforms are very scared of things which are political, which are about these big topics, which are about geopolitics and about the platforms and about holding governments to account. And they're scared of them, and they think audiences won't understand them, and they're going to be put off by them. And these are some of the most interesting, knotty, nuanced, exciting kind of stories on the planet right now. And when I was started off on this journey, when I was trying to explain Cambridge Analytica to my editor the editor of the Observer newspaper, and I would sort of go in and say, there's this crazy company, and it's a defense contractor, and it's worked in Afghanistan, but it's got all this data from Facebook. And the guy who's the vice president of the company, he's Steve Bannon, who's in the White House now, and he's controlling the Pentagon. And then there's like all of these British lords who are also on the board of the company. I mean, it sounds so crazy. And you know, they really tried to like figure out. So I sat down, with them to try and figure out how we do it as a news story. And in the end, it was sort of like they kind of came up with, well, I think it's a sort of 700-word piece about these electoral interference bits down here. and I was like, you know what, the story. I said the problem isn't the story, the problem's news. And I walked out, and I walked up to the feature desk at the Observer, which is run by women, and I was like, oh, God, I was like them. And it was very gender split at the time at the Observer. The news was very male, features were very female, and they were like, oh, don't worry, we'll do it. The women will do it. And I had to find this different way of telling the story, it wasn't classic news investigative journalism. I had to do it in this more, it used all of the same tools, but I had to do it in this more featurey way. And because this storytelling component of it was so vital, it was just impossible to understand in these bare kind of, traditional ways.
Form is crucial. It's crucial. So let's break through form.